And I don't know. I just don't think that that's we're not here long, right? And another thing that I've learned from back to Jed McKenna, another thing I've learned from Jed McKenna is what the fact that you and I are conscious beings having this conversation at this point in history, we have won the cosmic lottery. And it doesn't even have to be Enlightenment literature. Read about evolutionary biology. Me and you, are the most recent example of a line of genes that goes back millennia. We made it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Conversations podcast. In this episode, I am joined by the amazing Jim O'Shaughnessy. Jim is the chairman and co-chief investment officer of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management. Thank you, Stuart Alsop III, host of Crazy Wisdom podcast, for connecting me with Jim. Having the chance to talk with him has been truly enlightening, as we cover deep ideas regarding the realness of reality, Jed McKenna's influence on how Jim sees the world, how to shift from a mindset built around beliefs to one empowered by mental models, how does the stock market function as a metaphor of life itself, and much more. Of course, as we dug deep into the rabbit hole, the Matrix overlords interrupted us 2 times during our conversation, just like how it happened when I talked with Stuart. As Jim put it in this conversation, once you are aware of the Cosmic Awareness Society, they become aware of you. These kinds of conversations that ignite your heart, little by little, shed a light on what really matters and lead us towards a path of truth. Jim, I can't thank you enough for joining me to puncture a hole in the matrix. I look forward to having more mind-bending conversations with you. Hope you all enjoy listening to this amazing conversation and join us on the path to breaking the matrix. Perhaps the overlords will pay you a visit as well. Enjoy. Hello everyone, I'm here with Jim O'Shaughnessy and I'm very honored to have you here in the show. It's an amazing opportunity to just try to, as we were talking on Twitter and how we connected, thanks to Stuart Alsop, we were trying to figure out the matrix in that conversation, and now with you, I'm trying to break the matrix. So James, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me, but I hate to disappoint you this early in the podcast, but there's no breaking the matrix. I think you learn that as I'm really interested in sort of seekers of knowledge and truth everywhere. And so I read a lot. I've read a lot of Jed McKenna. I've been reading the Tao Te Ching since I was 18. And what's so interesting to me is, however we want to frame it, right? A matrix, that's a very convenient frame to present this in. Plato, of course, did that centuries ago with the cave, his story about the metaphor of the cave. But I think that the ultimate thing you learn, at least for me, but I'm not enlightened, so what do I know? Is that you can progress, you do progress. And as you do, my friend Dan Jeffries, who got me into Jed, and he's got a great article, maybe you put it in the show notes, Rick and Morty Explain the Universe. And we always laugh when we're talking to each other that, we're just in a different part of the matrix. Right. And on that point, interestingly, so it was always one of my theories, and I put up a big thread of movies that people who've read Jed McKenna might like. Of course, The Matrix leads the list, but I always thought that I had kind of this cool knowledge that in the second and third matrices, they make it very clear to you that they're still in the matrix. Yeah. You think they're in the real world, but then Neo stops machines in the real world, meaning, nope, still in the matrix. Yeah. And what's fascinating is so I was fascinated by quantum physics for a long time too. And boy, when you start reading those guys and they start with their meta philosophy, I'm like, this sounds an awful lot like Taoism to me. And, you know, the whole idea of a holographic universe and, you know, very, very interesting things. I don't think we'll ever figure it out, but I think we can get closer and closer. And hopefully, as we get closer and closer, build better mental models for how we interact with it.
Wow, definitely. And yes, one of my questions for you right off the bat is, well, first off, I believe that the person who acknowledges that he's not enlightened, he's on the right path towards enlightenment. So for starters, I believe we can glitch the matrix with people like you around our society who have this humble approach to life, which is, I don't know, you in plenty of interviews that I've seen and articles that you write on, and what works on Wall Street is that you propose in your book, what works on Wall Street is you propose ideas, but it is within the notion that you know you don't know, right? And that's key. And you mentioned Jed McKenna, so let's go right into him. What has he taught you about life?
Wow. So that's a long question. So first off, let me give you my theory about Jed McKenna, okay? Because I think he's the real deal. And the reason I think he's the real deal is, where is he? If he was a faker, or if he was doing this to build a following that he could monetize, he would have 5 million followers on Twitter. He would have sold out seminars. He would have all of these things. By the way, he or she, right? Because we don't know.
Yeah.
And his authenticity to me is added to by this fact that he's nowhere. I know people who have put private detectives trying to find Jed McKenna. So the first thing that I would say is, I believe that Jed McKenna is a fictional character. I think, and I think it's brilliant. Whoever the author or authors are of the works created a fictional character to tell us that we're fictional characters, which is fantastically meta.
Wow.
So what have I learned from Jed McKenna? Well, I guess I would start with the idea that most people don't want to wake up. Remember Cypher in the Matrix?
Yeah.
I know it's not real, man, but this steak tastes great. Put me back in, please.
Yeah, you mentioned Rick and Morty, like Rick when he's getting the cookie, you know, all the time. Simple Rick, right? When he's in the dream state.
Right.
You know?
And so that's kind of number one. And number two is you should let them alone. You should, if you understand an attempt to become more informed on this path that in most cases, in almost all cases, leads to, you know, the gateless gate, and there you stand. but that's okay, because even Jed now says that he was wrong in his original books. He now says that true enlightenment, right, like Siddhartha or Buddha, is a drag. And it's just like, oh, well, this isn't fun, because he goes on at length about how human beings need conflict. And conflict, because think about it as we're putting on this lavish production that's filmed 24 hours a day, right? My friend Ron Howard made a movie called Ed TV, and then there's a slightly better known one called The Truman Show with Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
That explore this issue. And the idea is, at least to me, that when you take that first step, it's a doozy. Because really what it challenges you to do is something that I had sort of started on, but the idea of, look, you think you're so smart, you think you know all these things, you don't, and you aren't. And so I think what else he's taught me is, you know, reality can be a bitch, right? And so his new thing is, so enlightenment is a booby prize, according to him. Awaking, what he calls a human adult. To become a human adult, a lucid human adult, awake in the dream state. That's the prize.
Wow.
Because if you are a human adult, wide awake in the dream state, you can do so many fun things, man, that it's just like, it's like a giant playground, right? Because, and by the way, this is not new with Jed. I mean, the Bhagavad Gita, I mean, Zen, the Taoism, this is Plato. This has been around for a long, long time. And you could start seeing the crumbs of it everywhere.
Right.
People who were kind of on this path centuries ago. And so I think that, you know, if you're going for the gold, so to speak, the gold is now being awake in the dream state, but understanding where you are. And you know, one of the things that I do notice a lot more now than I ever used to is literally the society in which most of us live is simply trying to divert our attention, I guess would be the best way to put it, on things that to my mind are truly meaningless. And it's like people get like, we were talking earlier about politics. You know, look, I'm an objective, I'm a conscientious observer. I always say I try to be Switzerland. And people get really mad at me. Like, if you don't believe this, then you're on the other side. I think what's happened interesting in this time is that we've been living through what I call an emotional plague. And one of its most toxic agents is a mind virus. And you might catch the mind virus over on the left, or you might catch the mind virus over on the right. People, they're pretty much the same thing. And anything that invites me to stop thinking, I immediately stop reading. Because, you know, if you let yourself think into dogmatic thought, in my opinion, you've stopped thinking. There is no new information in dogmatic thought. I mean, you know, Claude Shannon, who I think should be as well known as Albert Einstein, he created information theory, and everything right now, what we're doing right now, impossible without Claude Shannon's information theory. He even named bits and bytes, right? So very few people know who he is. There's a great documentary on him on one of the pay services called Bit Player. He was, as you might expect, he was quite eccentric. But the interesting thing that, and like if you are familiar with work with guys like Brian Romelli, who I've had on the podcast, I love those kind of on the edge thinkers, right? Because what I have found is that if everybody believes it, it's probably, you're not going to mine any gold there. And so, you know, Claude Shannon, Robert Anton Wilson talking about information theory, it's like, you should find, to Shannon, information was new information, right? So, and he actually built some formulas for figuring out how much new information was in something. And one of the things that I thought I got a chuckle out of was a poem is filled with new information. A political speech has zero new information, no matter who's giving it, by the way.
Yeah.
The thing that I always try to stress with people is I don't have a dog in this hunt, and they get crazy with me because you got to pick a side. No, you don't.
No.
And look, I congratulated President Biden and Vice President Harris on Twitter today because I'm an American and I have great respect for this country and for the office of the president. And, you know, I just don't understand why people can't get past that, right? Because the other thing that I think is that, especially in movements, like Eric Hoffer has a great book called The True Believer. And he himself was a fascinating guy. He was a longshoreman who actually turned out to be like one hell of a philosopher. And in his True Believer, he talks about understanding mass movements. And one of the things that he says, which I find frightening actually, is that mass movements don't need a heaven, but they do need a hell. Wow. And they have to have a devil. So if you pour all of your emotions into a political candidate, or it doesn't even have to be, I mean, if you pour all of your emotions into an other, right? I think what you're doing, and of course I could be wrong. I always preface everything with, I'm probably wrong. But if you pour all of your emotions into another, you release your agency in life. And when you release your agency in life, it becomes very easy to develop a victim mentality. And when you do that, nothing's ever your fault. And I don't know, I just don't think that that's the, we're not here long, right? And another thing that I've learned from, back to Jed McKenna, another thing I've learned from Jed McKenna is the fact that you and I are conscious beings having this conversation at this point in history, we have won the cosmic lottery. And you know, it doesn't even have to be Enlightenment literature. Read about evolutionary biology. We, me and you, are the most recent example of a line of genes that goes back millennia. We made it. Wow. Not too many people think about life that way. So I kind of look at life as this, I'm constantly just amazed and delighted because I'm here. And you know, that's like the odds against that are astronomical. Wow. So I just think that if you have certain mental models that work that way, your outcomes become better, right? So the philosopher Wittgenstein said, don't look for meaning, look for use. And what he means by that is pretty self-evident. Everybody is like trying to, and Buddha said it himself, I'll leave it to the scribblers to try to dissect my words. By the way, apparently Buddha himself never wrote anything. So everything you see with, quote, Buddha, it was someone else who wrote that.
Wow.
And so I think we get distracted. I think we are easily distracted. And I think that basically we are optimized, back to kind of evolutionary psychology and biology. We are optimized for a world that no longer exists. Cultural evolution is massively cool. And the minute, well,
that's the Matrix. That's the Matrix. Stuart, it happened again. They called us when we were talking on the Matrix.
I thought that this was turned off.
Yeah, I'm telling you, when you're closer to the truth, the landlords come and pay a visit.
I will turn the phone off.
No worries.
That's funny. There you go. The Matrix calling. Jim, shut up.
I'm telling you.
Well, that's great. And it's great that it'll appear on this. And it completely interrupted. You did well, Matrix.
I'm telling you, it happens. It happens with Stuart. It happened with you. And at least the last call we had in the show was from you. Apparently, in Twitter, you told us that you called to interrupt you, and now the Matrix is paying you a visit. So
it is. Now, see, with me, I find that delightful.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just so incredible. You know, Jung said there are no. Well, I don't think he said exactly there are no coincidences, but he called it synchronicity, and he was an interesting dude because he sort of saw all of human beings as kind of like united, right? I think it was Schopenhauer who said all minds equal one, right? And so that's very interesting to me. And I think that that's where our real challenge is, right? Our real challenge is in this idea of no self. So human beings are emotional creatures. We are essentially driven by emotion. Most people want to not admit that, but I think it's pretty true. If you study, again, evolution, if you study the way people react to things, um, emotions and the primary emotion is fear. And when I talk to people who have kind of read all the same stuff that I've read, and they say, well, what should I do? I'm like, write out, imagine what it would look like if you weren't afraid. And a lot of people love that. And a lot of people just take that very statement as kind of a challenge or me dismissing them. Quite the opposite. It's me embracing them.
Right.
But it's funny because I just did a series and put it up on Twitter called The Thinker versus the Prover. And that came from Robert Anton Wilson and a Dr. Leonard Orr, who came up with this very simplistic concept that works really well. That's the interesting thing about it. Again, look for meaning or look for use, not for meaning, right? So anyway, one of the things that I found when I've worked with people, because one of the things that I like to do is I work with younger people in both in and out of my field, right? Who demonstrate their persistence and ability for me to say, yeah, I should work with them by, just, hey, can you do it now? Will you do it now? Will you do it now? But they're not doing it in a irritating or offensive manner. They're doing it in a very respectful and yet persistent manner, and I admire that. But one of the things, if you read that piece that I've learned, and I learned that from Brian Romelli, was I changed the wording of things to stop saying you, right? Because you immediately people think, is he attacking me? Is he saying that my beliefs are wrong? My beliefs? And so what happens is, for most humans, we're all running human OS, human operating system. And so what happens is we have this collection of ideas and beliefs and whatnot, many of which are absolutely fundamentally not true and have been proven to be not true time and time and time and time again. And so when we come to them, we embrace them. When we embrace them, we invest our emotions. When we invest our emotions, we invest our ego. And so suddenly you start seeing on social media, this is a hill I will die on, right? And I always respond, and it irritates people. I embrace the General George S. Patton idea of making the other poor dumb bastard die on his hill rather than me dying on mine. Now, that said, would I die on a hill? Yes, I would. I would die on a hill for my children, grandchildren, or my family. Because, that bond is just, it's inescapable. And kind of like, again, evolution programmed me to do that, right? So I have 3 beautiful grandchildren. I have 3 fantastic children. I have a wonderful wife. Yes, I'll die on that hill. But beliefs, really just go back. You don't even have to go back too far. Go back 300 years and look at what the most intelligent people in the world believed. And like virtually all of it's wrong. And so that's another thing that I did and has been really helpful for me, but it was really hard to do, which is instead of talking about my beliefs in quotes, I talk about, and I'm stealing from Charlie Munger here, a matrix worth of mental models. And the reason for that is that through all my studies, I've found that most beliefs are kind of formed not to be challenged, right? Faith, right? So models, on the other hand, are designed to be challenged, right? And so if you can make that just slight shift in thinking, you're going to be far more open to understanding where some of your models are really efficacious and where some really are bad. I'll give you an example. So the idea of guaranteed income here in the United States. That was something that I was essentially opposed to, primarily because I'm an empirical guy, right? And I look at all of the empirical results. I look at Switzerland voting it down like 75 to 25. I look at other countries trying it and then stopping it. And yet I changed my mind about it. And I changed my mind about it because I noticed that where society is right now is in great tumult. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. I think it can actually be a great thing. So for example, I think going forward, it's going to be a golden age for biology and medical breakthroughs. I think it's going to be a golden age for entrepreneurs. I think that there's a lot of great stuff that is happening if you suit it to it. However, through no fault of their own, there are a lot of people who aren't. And I don't think that we should just say, well, too bad, so sad. You know, you didn't make it. And so I studied a lot more. We have a guest that I'm going to drop at some point. He's probably mad at me because I haven't dropped him. And we had the interview a long time ago. But so I came to the understanding that, you know, these ideas have been around forever. I love the guy in, I think, the 40s who called it the success dividend. And his idea was, hey, America is the most successful country economically in the world. We should be paying dividends to our shareholders, in quotes, i.e. citizens. And then, you know, you look at it. And again, this is another reason why you don't want to see things through political lens, right? Because if you look at it through a political lens these days, for the most part, this is a very left of center idea, right? Like if we spent the rest of this podcast with me delineating what I believe, say, politically, half the people would listen and they would say, my God, that guy is to the left of Bernie's, you know, Bernie. And then the other half would say, what a right-wing fanatic, right? So because what animates me most is anti-authoritarianism, right? I think, well, we were chatting before you came on. I think that we should be very wary of any kind of authoritarian who decides that they want to be able to tell you what to do if you're not breaking any laws, right? And I understand history, and you see that as states become corrupt, laws multiply, right? And, you know, if you can read the Latin, this is nothing new. So if you don't see things through a political lens, and mine being just anti-authoritarianism, but I don't look at it through that lens. I look at it through the lens of, there are a lot of people who, through no fault of their own, their skill set right now is not designed to be an entrepreneur, is not designed to be an artist, is not designed to do medical research. And giving them what I would call a basic income where they could pursue their own loves and desires. I just think, I mean, you know, FDR kind of did it during the 30s, during the Depression. We have some of the most beautiful bridges on the Merritt Parkway here in the world. I sometimes would just like take walks and just look at these bridges because they're so gorgeous. Why? Because FDR put a bunch of really incredible artists to work on them so they could earn some money. Wow. And so when you make the shift to mental model as opposed to belief, you're able to disconnect from this idea of this is me, and anyone who doesn't like that idea is attacking me, right? We are just literally investing so much emotion on Sturm und Drang in things we can't control. So, you know, I always try to also look at it as dispassionately as I can and kind of think, you know, what if this were an alternate timeline and I actually came from a different planet and I landed here? What would I think of what was going on?
Yeah, it's a great question.
And so this idea of like investing so much of your emotional energy, that's hard, by the way, and it makes you tired, and it makes you often when things don't go your way, it makes you angry and or envious. And I think that, the seven deadly, I'm not religious, but the seven deadly sins, they got it right, right? And all of them were kind of roadblocks to a successful society. And I guess that's where I'll end on Jed. Society is designed to make us into a certain type of creature. And there's no conspiracy here, by the way. It was a very natural evolution. Public schools in the United States, why did they get formed? Because industrialists wanted people who were going to be able to be content sitting 8 hours in the same room.
Right.
And so it's not a conspiracy, but what society wants for you and what you want for you are probably very different. And so one of the ways that I think that we can at least experiment with that is this idea of basic income. Now, of course, because if it bleeds, it leads. The first thing that the mainstream media will do is they will find the X% of people who are doing horrible things, right? They will find the X% of people who, look at this drug addict or look at this layabout. And that is a very powerful message because of, the DNA of your average American, right? So I just think it's worth a try. But society, for me, if I could wave a magic wand, it would be let people, if they're not violent, right? And if they're not infringing on anyone else's rights, let them do what they want to do, because that's where the creativity gets unlocked. And I just think that's very cool. And, I imagine that Jed would probably agree, although I don't know. He might tell me I'm an idiot. Probably he would tell me I'm an idiot. Tony DeMello is another guy I recommend highly. I call him a gentler, kinder Jed. Anyway, I'm babbling on. Let's move on.
Wow. Jim, I'm speechless because you, in just a brief period, you said so many things that, for me, I'm gonna reflect on. This won't get forgotten very quickly, because you touched on a lot of things. And if I can, I'll send you a picture on how many notes that I have. But one of the biggest challenges that I find is that, how can I put it? You can hear me?
Yeah, you dropped it for a minute there. Just the Matrix again. Don't worry about it.
Wow. This never happens. My microphone just died a bit.
Yeah, well, there's a great thing in Robert Anton Wilson, and it's something about the Cosmic Awareness Society. When you become aware of the Cosmic Awareness Society, they become aware of you.
That's what I'm telling you. It's amazing, and this conversation is reaching like great energy in terms of we're speaking truth in the sense that we don't know the truth.
Right.
That's key. The key is that what I find the most difficulty on is awakening, or trying to awaken, let's say, in this dream state, having this lucid dream, but around me I see a society where I see my group of people that are still dreaming. How do I relate to people dreaming? And what I'm fearful the most of is that I'm trying to think of myself as awakened, and that's meta dreaming, putting me in a meta dream state, right? This ignorance of life being a dream, and me trying to be the biggest blue pill drinker of all in Matrix, right? And I have so many questions, but I just wanted to touch on what you touch on. How should we assemble society if you had a magic wand? I keep thinking this is from Kabbalah, from the religion, is this question: if God is omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent, what does he lack? What do you think does God lack if he has those three things?
Wow, that's interesting. So I guess what I would say is, I can't remember who first uttered it, but if God didn't exist, we'd have to invent him.
Mhm.
Because, literally, if you look around your world, okay, everything you see that isn't untouched land by human beings comes out of the human mind.
Hmm.
Every single thing.
Exactly.
It's one of the reasons why I'm so kind of bullish on humanity when people are bearish on it, is because innovation just never stops and it's compounding now. And I personally think that's incredible. And so, that's kind of like, I was brought up Catholic, right? So those symbols and those things live within me, even though I might not want them to, right? So if you look at one of the Catholic prayers, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end.
Hmm.
For thine is the kingdom and the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. Now, take that apart. For thine is God. In other words, I'm nothing. You're everything. I surrender all of my agency to you. The glory, as it was in the beginning. So we've covered the past, is now. We've covered the present, and always will be. We covered the infinite future. World without end. I actually like that part, the world without end. But you see, encoded in that prayer is a command structure. And that command structure is, hey, you're nothing. God is everything. As you put it, he's omnipotent, he's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So, so what I think is, other cultures had very different gods, right? And why are they ridiculous now? Whereas the monotheistic, all-powerful God of the Old and New Testament is not. I prefer to change the terms and reframe it, right? I am I'm a probabilistic thinker, so I will not say I'm certain. I am high. I have very strong. I have no beliefs, but I have very strong suspicions. I'm stealing from Robert Wilson there. But so really high on the probability scale is the idea that I have no idea about the universe, like, at all. I'm a
Yeah.
domesticated primate who, I'm the ape who is thinking about the universe.
We're
And
a monkey civilization with the brains of gods.
yeah, exactly, right? We're walking around with these quantum computers in our head, and they have no owner's manual.
Yeah.
And so um, I would reframe it and say, is there a perfect intelligence guiding the universe? Jed would argue that. Tony DeMello would argue that. Um, Almost anyone from Zen or Buddhism would at least take a look at it. Taoists, yeah, they probably, but maybe not. There's a great, just as a brief digression, there's a great painting that I saw when I was in Japan. And it's a Chinese painting. I was a little freaked out that, I'm seeing a Chinese painting here in Japan. But it's called the Vinegar Tasters.
Hmm.
And so the one is tasting the vinegar, and it's an allegory, right? So the vinegar is life, and they're tasting it, right? So one is making a face like this, like, what is this? What is this vinegar? I want to dissect it. And that was kind of Confucianism, right? Which represented a long philosophy of thought in China for a long time. The other guy is making a really bitter face. This is horrible. And that represented a far less well-known tradition in China called legalism.
Hmm.
And they were all about, binding and saying, this is true, this is wrong. You better be on the right side. And then the final one is this guy with the vinegar, and he's got this huge smile on his face, and that's the Taoist.
Wow.
And basically the Taoist, I've been reading Lao Tzu for more than 45 years, and I'm just now starting to figure him out. So what I would say is we all have illusions, right? I mean, if we're right about this being not what it seems, and again, I think the probabilities there are pretty high. I have suspicions. Then our next question is, well, okay, well, what is it?
Wow.
And so that's kind of the fun for me, because I'm just endlessly curious. And so I go down all these rabbit holes, and like when I do something, I'm kind of all in. It's like, I don't read one Robert Anton Wilson book. I read all of his books. I don't read one Jed book. I read all of his stuff. And same with Tony DeMello, others. But I also read very broadly, because, there is wisdom everywhere in this world. You just have to go looking for it, right? Robert Pirsig, another kind of hero of mine who wrote Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, said, everyone says they want to find the truth, and then the truth knocks at their door and they don't answer. And they wonder, I wonder who that was. Very puzzling.
Wow. Yeah.
So this idea is, again, another hero, Richard Feynman, the physicist,
Right.
who amazing man. And his kind of rule that I try to live by is, rule number one is don't be fooled, and you are the easiest person to fool. And so I'm always amused when because, by the way, I do a lot of things on social media that for not purely fun reasons, right? I am at my heart a researcher, and I'm fascinated by mimetic behavior, for example. I'm fascinated by watching provers fight with each other. Because, I mean, talk about, 0 or 0.01 chance of anything actually changing. But there's a lot of empirical, interesting data there that maybe not, can lead me to better mental models for my day job, which is quantitative investing.
Yeah.
So my answer is, I don't want to. It's not in my interest to trample on anyone's beliefs. Beliefs can move mountains, right? Without beliefs that, little pieces of paper that we call currency have value. I mean, think about that again. If you came from another planet and you're kind of looking and you're like, these domesticated primates put great value in these little slips of paper. And Douglas Adams, another guy I highly recommend reading, because he's not only funny, he's brilliant. And one of the things that he did was a riff on them deciding that they were going to make leaves from trees, the currency. And he goes, the outcome of this was that we were all enormously rich. but then, of course, the currency had no value because it was everywhere. But so there are a lot of beliefs that, and I call them, they form consensus reality, right? So again, back to waking up, right? If you have very, very different ideas that might get in the way of consensus reality, you better be really careful. And you better be in a society where there aren't people who can label you an apostate or a heretic and burn you alive, because they will. Unfortunately, we have a very long history, and that's mimetic in nature as well. The whole idea of conflict, of a devil. The devil becomes the scapegoat. You associate people with that devil. Burn the witch, burn the witch, burn the witch. And that's the not great side of human nature, I think. And so learn to understand the power of symbols, learn to understand what's embedded, like literally embedded genetically in you, and be very careful about trying to step on a belief that is deeply embedded in the world psyche, because it won't end well for you or for others. One of the things that in my research that I found fascinating is, so we take in, like right now, you and I are being bombarded with information and signals, right? And so our brains, the quantum computers, are like, 99.99% of that I'm not paying any attention to, because it would overwhelm me and I would go crazy. And so I'm reading in, the other thing I do, by the way, I tend to read actually academic papers on this stuff, and those done by practitioners directly, as opposed to trying to read like a journalist's interpretation of them.
Yeah.
But so I found that was a theory in psychiatry, was that schizophrenia was actually filter failure, right?
Wow.
So you and me both have operating filters, right? We're, at least I hope, we're not crazy.
Me too.
Right? And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, well, that makes total sense, right? We have these filters that filter out like 99.99%, and then the other gets through. And certain people, much more gets through and drive them crazy, right? And thus the voices, thus all of that kind of thing. And so it's a challenge, because we want to open the perception filter as wide as we can without like hurting ourselves,
Right.
and without just like kind of just sitting there rocking back and forth. So I think that I'm a big believer in letting people, unless it's really destructive, right? So in letting people follow their muse, right?
Yeah.
And I don't have to agree with it. That's okay. Why am I more right than them?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm constantly willing to say, I don't know.
Yeah, that's key. And the answer that to that question, you put it right perfectly. And the suggested way of thinking of it is, if God is omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent, he lacks limit. And that's why he created us, apparently. And I'm not religious as well in that sense, but I love the idea that we're unlimited potential enclosed in this monkey body, in this rational body, with these beliefs, with all of what makes us us. Mm-hmm. And as you say, I believe we have an immense responsibility to allow everyone to understand the tiny moment they have on Earth. In that sense, we all have this moral responsibility to allow others to think of what makes them them, in that sense. And at the end of the day, the biggest paradox of it all is, once you allow people to be, they enlighten you through their own light. And that's key, because
So namaste, right? You know what that means. It means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. And I have learned from just like reading people that I thought I might not agree with. I've learned more. I mean, just it's incredible, right? So I think that to be successful in life, you need to be very open-minded. You don't need to be, because it's so interesting. I'll post something on Twitter about being open-minded, and I can actually now count it on a stopwatch before the first tweet goes up. If you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for anything. Well, that's just patently untrue.
Yeah.
And that's a person who believes deeply in their set of delusions. And so I agree. By the way, your theory about God invented us because he was bored, that is a multi-philosophical idea, right?
Yeah.
So Brahman, right? Same thing. The unnamed Tao, same thing. And yeah, right? What would you do if you were perfect intelligence? You'd get bored. And so you'd want to kind of take in some interest. And right, so conflict. There is no interest in anything, right? Can you imagine a television show succeeding with a broad group of the public? Because I'm sure that there will be subgroups where this is true, but where people just sat and stared at the screen. You're just going to go, what the hell is this?
I want to know what the niche is for that show.
Yeah, I would too, right? But so if you think about it as a production,
Yeah.
right? Well, what do we need? We need conflict, right? The hero's journey. It's mapped out beautifully, and most of literature follows the same formula. And the easiest way to understand it is, if you want to understand it romantically, boy finds girl, boy falls in love with girl, girl falls in love with boy, boy screws something up, girl stops loving him, boy redeems himself happily ever after. And then, that's one where, the idea of redemption is which people love, by the way. And then if you don't have that turn of mind and you want to look at Kafka's Metamorphosis, where he wakes up, great opening line, I woke up this morning to find myself a giant bug. but there is tension, and without tension, you can't have drama.
Right.
And whether it's comedy, whether it's tragedy, it like you go back to Aristophanes, who was the playwright in ancient Greece, who wrote The Clouds, and who some people think was one of the reasons why they executed Socrates, because he didn't like him. There's the other thing, right? So much of human interaction, if you dig and dig and dig and dig, it comes down to, I really hated that guy.
Yeah.
And right, that is drama.
Yeah.
And so you're like Schindler in Schindler's List. If you haven't seen that movie, I highly recommend it. Liam Neeson, not a pretty, but we need to understand that. We need to understand what can happen when normal people sink into barbarism and unthinkable behaviors, right? And so there we've got Schindler, and I love one of his lines when he's recruiting his accountant, and his accountant is Ben Kingsley, who plays a great role, and Kingsley's kind of like looking down the list of all the things he needs to do, right? And it's everything. So he looks at Schindler's character and he says, if I may be so bold, may I ask what you do? and Liam Neeson does this line perfectly. It's, I am the presentation. And let me tell you, that is much more important than a lot of people understand, right? Why did Edison and not Tesla win? Edison had better PR. Wow. Why does most of the world think of Newton as the inventor of calculus? Well, there was a guy in Germany named Leibniz who was maybe even a little ahead of him that got virtually nothing. Newton knew how to promote what he was talking about.
Amazing.
And so it's not enough. Now we're back kind of into the being awake humans, adults in the dream state. You got to understand the production values. And if you're not entertaining, it's going to be very hard for you to get that message across, and or compelling or persuasive, or all of those things that add to drama, right? Yeah. And so if you just think about this as this massive drama production for the benefit of some perfect intelligence that's just chuckling and loving it. Look at what these silly humans did this time. This is great.
Yeah.
Right? So, if you think about it in those terms, it frees you, I think,
It does, yeah.
because you know it's we all end up in the same place, right? And the idea, as far as I can tell, at least for me, and it sounds like for you too, is we are here so briefly.
Oof.
The world literally is our canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't we painting on it with brilliant colors? I mean, to me, that if you want kind of like if somebody said to me, Jim, give me the secret to life. Well, first off, there is no secret, but I would probably say, hey, your time here is so short. You got a blank canvas, fill it up, man. Leave it all on the field, because oddly, that makes your life interesting and fun. And I don't care if like your end goal is to be a great artist. I totally appreciate that. To be a great composer, to be a great author, to be a great sculptor, to be a great stonemason. I honestly, right? And there's an old story that I've used sometimes because it shows this attitude, right? And it's about three bricklayers, right? And they're building this huge structure. And the first one kind of goes into his thought bubble, and he's like, I can't believe that this foreman has it out for me. I am so oppressed, and I can't, this is just ridiculous. And there should be a revolution. We should throw this guy off the side of the bus. And the other guy is kind of thinking, well, at least what I'm doing, at least I can support my family. And that's important to me. The third guy is sitting there and he's got this huge smile on his face, and he's thinking, I'm building a great cathedral. Right? So you want to be that third guy. You don't want to be guy one or guy two or gal one or gal two, right? Because it's self-defeating. And why defeat yourself when there's so many other ways that out there that can defeat you through no help that you need to give them?
Yeah, everything is trying to defeat us, as you say, and I love how this connects into what you're talking about. Drama is the drama within our own minds, and that's what we're talking right now. We're trying to put a representation in the physical realm of what's happening within us, and the drama of existing, of having this. For some it's a burden, for others it's potential, but the burden of asking, what am I doing here? And that's drama in and of itself. Is how can I make this work for me? How can I make this work for others? And how can I, as you say, I didn't know about Namaste, how can I recognize your light and my light, and together. And one of the ways you do that, Jim, or at least the way I see it, is through your own career, your profession, and quantitative investing. And I was thinking on you being such a great thinker and having so much conscientiousness. And how do you think the stock market functions, and investing as a whole functions as a metaphor in the way we live in the world, in the way we interact with other people?
Interesting. The only thing I want to do is I heard you say something that I think we might want to rethink, and that is everyone's conspiring to defeat you. I don't agree with that.
No,
I think
nature.
Oh, okay. Well, I even think there are parts of nature who got your back, right? And if you're swimming and the current is strong, guess which way you're going to make a lot of progress and which way you're going to make very little.
You're
you
right.
swim with the current, you're going to make a lot of progress. If you swim against it, you're going to make very little.
Yeah.
So it's just being aware of, the ebb and flow of things and noting them and saying, I could bang my head against this wall or this rock or try to swim against this strong current, or I can just let it take me, right? That's a very Taoist kind of attitude. Yeah. Now, the stock market, that's really interesting. So I haven't really thought a lot about how these two things, other than Look, it, the stock market, in my opinion, at least in this country, is kind of the Olympics of business. And by that, I mean, I think I was drawn to it because there's just so many things you can learn and so many things you can try to figure out. I love those puzzles. And so I took a very Aristotelian view, right? Which is like, okay, so here I am. You know, probably the best thing that I could do is just test all of these things and see where they land, right? And so I, again, luck and skill define a lot of lives. In certain endeavors, much more skill, right? So in tennis, you better be willing to play the loser's game because the winner's going to always beat you because the skill factor is so high in tennis. And the same is true of the stock market, right? The skill factor is very high. So what you want to do, at least in my opinion, is test everything that, you know, the prognosticators and gurus are spouting. By the way, I would say ignore them because their forecasts are, you might as well hire a monkey to flip a coin. And I think, by the way, one solution for that would be if you made money, you made them put money on it, right? Instead of like going on financial TV or going on a podcast and saying, I know that the market is going to crash to this month and it's going to go down by 70%. That's frightening.
Put your money where your mouth is, no?
Exactly. Okay, so you think that? Great. Let's take your portfolio and short everything. You willing to do that? Suddenly, he's like, whoa.
In the game.
Right. You know, I think Taleb has that great quote, which is, don't tell me what you think, show me what's in your portfolio, right? So anybody can go on and put an earpiece on and sound really smart. And, you know, that's because we are creatures of narrative. That's, you know, and human beings have a high desire for certainty and illusion of control. And it doesn't exist. I mean, you can talk in terms of percentages. So you can talk about directionally, right? So directionally, since the founding of the New York Stock Exchange in the late 1700s, US stock returns any given year have been positive 70% of the time, negative 30% of the time. That's a base rate. That base rate should inform you about which way to bet, right? It's like, you know, Damon Runyon had a great quote, which is, the battle is not always to the strong nor the race to the swift, but that's the way to bet. So I guess I love puzzles. I love figuring stuff out. And it seemed to me, as I started reading, like Reminiscence of a Stock Operator was one of the first books I read, like everyone. And I thought it was great. And I think it's still great. If you read that book now and just think, could I be reading this exact same thing today? The answer is yes, right? So it also helps you in forming your understanding of human nature, right? I've often said that, you know, stocks change second by second. Human nature barely budges millennia by millennia. There's your arbitrage human behavior, because we don't know what industries are going to dominate people's imaginations 20 years from now. We can have ideas, but what we do know is that those industries will exist, right? And if you just understand a little bit of history, you see it happening time and time and time and time again. It ignites the drama, right? So South Sea Trading Company, Isaac Newton, right? Smartest guy on the planet. Leibniz would dissent from that. But one of the smartest guys on the planet, and he lost his fortune, causing him to lament that he could measure the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of men. And, you know, there's a tip. If you're looking for stock market tips, a good one is if anyone starts writing poetry about your investment, probably should sell. Well, there was a poem that went, fill the South Sea goblet full, the gods shall of our stock take care. Europa pleased accepts the bull, and Jove with joy puts off the bear. Ouch, right? So poetry, emotion, it's off the scale, right? And of course, it's like, well, there's a bubble. The thing that's interesting though is like we don't learn. And so later it's railroads, or it's beer, or it's talking pictures, right? So Warner Brothers went up like, I don't know, 500% in the year because talking pictures. RCA, which was the Radio Corporation of America, hit a high that it never re-achieved. Well before they started making all the money. It was like people were like, this is amazing, right? And so we get overly excited, and we, the four horsemen of the investment apocalypse: fear, greed, hope, and ignorance. And only ignorance is not an emotion. Fear, greed, and hope, right? Emotions, again, right, have caused more losses and more heartache than anything else in investing. And so, if I'm giving simple advice, it's bet with the base rates, and what's interesting is people have done very clever studies about this, right? Base rates are how often something occurs over a long period of time, over aggregate data. So my friend Annie Duke would say, if you don't look at it that way, you're going to be forever resulting. And her idea of resulting is me looking at an investment that I made a month ago, and I decide to close it out, and I look at it and I was like, shit, I lost like 25% on that. And then I beat myself up about that particular thing, and I make that thing, that singular occurrence, very important to me. You've lost, you're done. What you want to do is you want to come up with a process that aggregates all of your decisions, right? And says, oh, I'm doing okay, or I'm not, I need to learn how to change that. So, but because we are creatures of narrative, we find it so hard to act that way. And so this guy did this very clever study trying to prove about the importance and incredible usefulness of base rates. And so first group of people come in, he tells them the following. He goes, there's a town of 100,000, and I'm going to tell you, 70,000 of those people are lawyers, 30,000 are engineers. And I would always quip, well, that's one of the things wrong with society. It should be 70,000 engineers and 30,000 lawyers. Anyway, and then they say, we want you to guess what somebody is. And so they give them cards with just names on them. Frank, Mary, Tom, Missy. And they look at it and they go, you're not going to tell me anything else? And they're like, no. And so what does everyone do? The object is to get the most right. So they use the base rates. They say, well, okay, I'm going to say they're all lawyers, because that way I'm probably going to score a 70%. And that's what people actually do. Next up, they add meaningless descriptive data. Like Frank is 42 years old and has 3 children. Mary is 29 and works as a bank teller. Or no, they wouldn't say works as, but enjoys soap operas, or enjoys The Bachelor or Bachelorette, whatever. People begin to abandon the base rates for whether Mary or Tom or whomever sounds more like a lawyer or like an engineer, okay? They get much fewer right. Finally, they add stereotypical information. Frank is 43 years old, shy, likes mathematical puzzles, and doesn't go out on Saturday night. Engineer. Even if you up that to 99,999,000 of these people are lawyers and one's an engineer, you're going to say, I don't care, he's an engineer, right? So you bet completely against the base rate
Wow.
because you are programmed, like we all are, with certain heuristics that we use as rules of thumb. And Frank now conforms to your rule of thumb that defines an engineer. Probably wrong, by the way. And so bet with the base rate. Look at where the base rates are. And I also like to use the metaphor. Imagine if your doctor or insurance companies did the things this way as opposed to the empirical way. So imagine you've got, you know, your stomach is really hurting you and so badly that you go to see your doctor. And your doctor says, hey, good to see you. Tell me what's wrong. You say, oh, my stomach is dying. I'm dying here. And he goes, you know what? I gave this little yellow pill to the last guy that was in here who told me he had stomach problems, and he got better. So I think I'm going to give it to you. What do you think? You're going to say, you're insane. I'm going to leave, right? What you're going to want that doctor to say is, aha, yes, this is your condition is this. Here is the medication that we have found through many, many repeats of tests is very efficacious for solving your problem. That's the guy or woman you're going to want to see. Imagine insurance companies who give life insurance and they don't use the actuarial tables, which are grim but accurate. And so you come in and you're a young person, but you strike them wrong. You seem arrogant to them. And they're like, boy, he's arrogant. I don't like that guy. No life insurance for you. Then another guy comes in who's 65 years old, morbidly obese and smoking, and has a family history of heart disease, and no one lived past age 70, but he's such a nice guy. I'm going to give him a $10 million life insurance policy. Bingo, you're out of business. So when we reframe these things, we understand why people do what they do. Like insurance itself. Do you know what they originally called life insurance?
No.
Death insurance. How many sales do you think they made? Like none. None. Hi, would you like to buy some death insurance? No. Right? And so some clever person was sitting there going, I got an idea. Let's call this life insurance. $1 billion industry.
PR.
Exactly. But also framing.
Yeah.
Framing is very, very important. And so that affects everything in the stock market and it affects everything in life. And so my outlook, my framing is such that I believe life is a positive sum game for long-term players. So I'm going to play games that are long-term games that I believe add collectively to the good of my fellow men and women, right? If you are a zero-sum thinker, if you're a Malthusian who says we're going to starve ourselves to death and the planet's dying and I'm not, therefore I'm not going to have children, I'm not going to invest in my, right? You tend to have much more negative beliefs. And generally speaking, unless, it's right before the Black Plague, bully you if you got out of the city. But for the most part, your outcomes are much better by looking at the empirical base rate, how often, right? And then betting with it. Does that mean that you're always going to be right? Absolutely not. In fact, people like me who are quantitative investors, we invest knowing that X% of the time we're going to be wrong because we look at the data and we see that in all rolling 5-year periods, this particular strategy fails to work 35% of the time. And then we can say, what's the worst case scenario? How bad was that? And when you start looking at those numbers, you can see very bad. But the thing is, you can also tell your potential clients that. And so I'm a huge believer in that, but I'm also like our latest initiative at OSAM is this platform portfolio builder system called Canvas.
Campus, yeah.
And and so I was a huge believer in that back in the 1990s. I had a company called Netfolio, which essentially Canvas is a much better version of Netfolio. But I think that we are going into an age where mass customization, that was one of the earliest promises of the internet back during the dot-com craze, right? And it just didn't happen that way. And now we have the technology where if you come or you have an advisor who has access to the Canvas platform, that advisor can tailor make the portfolio to you. So that means that if you're a taxable investor, we can tax manage it and generate what we call tax alpha. Not always, of course, but in aggregate, we can find anywhere between, let's call it 20 and 50 basis points, even though the numbers are that we found historically are a little higher than that. Just by not changing anything, just by tax managing it for you. And then let's say you work for Google. We can say, well, what we're going to do is, because you have all these stock options at Google, we don't want to magnify that exposure because that's a risk. We can make the portfolio for you not invest in companies that have similar characteristics to Google. Finally, let's say that you are, one of your passions is women serving on boards of directors. Look, as a guy who had 4 sisters and has 2 granddaughters, has a wife, has 2 beautiful daughters, I'm very pro-woman. And so let's make that one of my things. We can tailor make your portfolio so that it overweights. Now, we're not going to do the whole thing because, we want some diversity, but we can overweight exposure to companies that have 20% of their C-suites or board members are women. So it's a brand new ballgame.
Wow.
And we think that we're just getting started. This is just the beginning of this. And honestly, again, I have a mental model here that I think is very, very accurate. And I think, 5 years from now, people are going to say, what were they doing with these mutual funds that they couldn't change? What were they doing with these ETFs and the horrible taxes and all that? So again, innovation. Will someone out innovate us? Probably, at least over the very long term. We hope to keep up with them. But that's the thing. If you're thinking something, I can pretty much guarantee there's at least 30 other people who are thinking the same thing.
Wow. Yeah, and on that note, if you wouldn't have innovated, maybe someone else wouldn't have the motivation to try to out motivate you in that sense, out innovate you in that sense, which is also a great way to play a long-term game with long-term people and win-win for everyone. Jim, I have to say that we have to wrap this up because you are making me just get out of the matrix really quickly rather than just trying to solve it piece by piece. And we two are witnesses before everyone else who listens to this. They tried 2 times in both ends to end the conversation. So, Jim, I want to do this again one more time or many other times because the notes that I write on, the questions that I have for you are endless. And I believe that this is just the proof that you're a big thinker and someone who has influenced the way I think, I see the world, and who will continue to do so in the future. So, Jim, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.